Do you feel like they're trying their best, but do you feel like they're actually prepared?
Well, it depends, and see that. I mean, that's going to spin into a bigger conversation of what role are the cops supposed to serve?
That's a big question,
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, we've been talking about that for some time now.
Yeah, you can tell I'm pushing a little bit.
Yeah.
To that direction.
I get you.
Yeah.
What role are they supposed to serve? Because even though if his ex-girlfriend is to be believed, he has some sort of behavioral health issue, right?
Well, he's definitely expressing that physically.
Right.
He's against going into this space. He doesn't want to go. I mean, it is technically resisting arrest.
The thing is, though, you are talking about someone who, at least from the witness account of the person who made the call to the cops, that has also committed a crime.
Right.
And so it's like you're in this situation where, from a humanitarian standpoint, you would want somebody who is, trained with people with behavioral health issues.
Sure.
So that way they can more expertly de-escalate the situation. But the fact still stands that, as per the way that the law is meant to carry out, he still has to get in that car. And so how do you, do the cops need to be trained in order to handle behavioral health issues as well as being able to handle normal, everyday, someone used a counterfeit 20 and we got to take them in because that's illegal type stuff? Or do we have separate resource officers who are specifically trained to handle these things? And it's almost like, these guys were waiting for paramedics. Is it kind of like one of those situations where you're waiting on someone to come and there might not be as many of them as there are cops because, more resources, more resources go to the cops and less resources would go to the other officers who are more equipped to handle these situations. And then you're waiting on them then because they're not everywhere. And, and that's interesting because they were waiting for paramedics too at this situation. Yes.
Later on in the story.
The story, yeah. And that's one of those situations where it's like, okay, so what is the main goal? Like, obviously we can have a hierarchy of goals, but what is the most important thing on that list in that scenario? Are you concerned about the comfort and safety of the individual who has reportedly committed a crime? Are you concerned about public safety? Right? Because even though, and I'm not trying to stigmatize people with behavioral health problems, but even though you are talking about a man with likely, at least, and I'm not an expert in this, his behavior does suggest, in my experience with people with behavioral health issues, that he probably does have some sort of behavioral health issue, or did have some behavioral health issue. But you are still talking about a grown man. You are still talking about somebody who is strong enough to, while handcuffed, prevent himself from being put in a car by two officers.
Right, yeah.
And so
he's definitely resisting.
Right. And you're also talking about a man, and I know that people have their own opinions about whether or not this plays a factor. You're talking about a man with a bunch of priors in terms of crimes, in terms of also violent crimes. So, and his behavioral health conditions can play into that, sure, but how do you balance out? That's, to me, a big part of this question is how do you balance out those priorities?
This video has basically given us a insight into the perspective of the people we, as a society, probably didn't give much credence to in terms of their perspective, or the cops on the scene, because, we saw a murder happen in the final acts of this situation. That's how we perceived it in the public eye. In this country, at least, in the world, let's be honest.
Yeah.
So this new video, this angle, the body cam footage, has basically forced us to sit and be along for the ride in the head of, or at least the perspective of, the first responding officer.
Yep.
And so from that perspective, it leads you to not only see and hear what they're doing, but also think almost kind of from their perspective. And that's what you're saying. It's like, okay, you have a gentleman here who has these priors. We got to take that into account as an officer. I'm not speaking as a public. The person on scene, the officers have difficult jobs. They want to make sure that they have as much information as they can have on someone that they're interacting with. So they look that stuff up. They're dealing with him. They're trying to be, I guess, in their way, de-escalating the situation. They're doing what they know how to do. It may not be enough in the grand scheme of things, but in that moment, in that time, they're doing what they can. Okay.
And primarily their job isn't to condemn a man. Their job isn't to assess whether or not he's guilty. That's the judiciary branch, right? That's why we have a court system. Now, whether or not that court system is perfect, we can argue about that all day.
Right. But the ideal...
Their job is to simply remove him from the situation, put him in a secure location, which in this case would be a jail, so that judiciary process can take place.
Right.
That is their primary job in that moment. Like, that's frankly their only job, unless he's posing like an imminent
immediate
physical threat to everyone else around him or them. Like, that's their job. So, like, they have to, at least in the way things are currently, they have to get him in that car.
They have to take him in.
Right. So how do you do that without, it's
a tough... I mean, especially since we know how it ends.